Okay, it's June 2nd, 2022, and we're ready to begin another planning board meeting, consent and preliminary matter agenda. Could we get a motion on the record plats?
Jerry says she's so moved.
I'll second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? That is approved. And I think that's all we have. Is that item 5 an extension request? It's hard for me.
That's a separate item.
No. I think we can go to the round table now with Gwen Wright.
Thank you. For the record, Gwen Wright, Planning Director, and I'm pleased to be here to share our Planning Director's report with you. We have had some really good progress on several projects. The Council has approved the Silver Spring Downtown and Adjacent Communities Plan. You're going to be seeing later today the resolution of adoption, and then at the full commission, the resolution of adoption for that. We are following up quickly with the Downtown Silver Spring Overlay Zone, which will also be discussed later today, and we're on track, we hope, to have all the elements of this plan finished by the fall, including the sectional map amendment and hopefully even the Unified Mobility Plan, the UMP for Silver Spring. We had a good meeting with DOT on that yesterday. So that is moving forward in a very expeditious way. We are also busily working on a whole series of master plans that you're going to start seeing more about. You're going to hear a little bit today about our work on the Fairland Briggs Cheney plan and a very, very exciting placemaking project that we're planning for the fall. We had a kickoff meeting for that event last night with the community. We're working on the Tacoma Park Minor Master Plan Amendment, the Rustic Roads Amendment, the Pedestrian Master Plan, and we're looking to kick off later in the summer new plans that were approved as part of our work program during the budget process. We have plans on University Boulevard, a corridor plan in Clarksburg, in other Silver Spring communities, and an urban design study in Friendship Heights. So we continue to be extremely, extremely busy. I've shared with you that our regulatory work and the number of applications continues to be quite large. We actually look to, we've looked at our fees that we've taken in fiscal year 22, and it looks like we will actually go above our projected fee goals for fiscal year 22, which is great news. It's really keeping all of our staff busy. We continue to fill vacancies. Again, we've been, I consider us quite fortunate in that a lot of planning agencies have been losing large numbers of staff and have been struggling to fill some of their vacant positions. We've been very, very fortunate and have been filling our positions with really good people. I don't want to say easily, but we have a good reputation. We're attracting good candidates. In the near future, we'll introduce some of those new staff to you. I have a really exciting hire in transportation planning for the Mid-County team that I am looking forward to introducing to the board. And we have, again, excellent new real estate analyst and demographer forecaster who are coming in our research and strategic projects division. So we're excited about that. But today, what I wanted to focus on, and I guess, do we have a PowerPoint to share? Was anything sent to you? Okay, let's see if I can pull up the PowerPoint, which is always a trick. We are going to focus on placemaking. And while I'm working on the PowerPoint, maybe we can talk about the first aspect of this, which is that we've made an exciting personnel change, and we wanted to talk to you about that because it will affect our placemaking work, but a lot of other projects as well. Atul Sharma is here with us. He is now going to be moving from the Mid-County Division to the Director's Office, and he is going to be an acting assistant to the deputy, to Robert, on development and design review. And I'm going to let Atul and Robert talk about that new role very briefly.
So I'll start. Good morning, Board. And Robert Cronenberg, for the record. This is exciting because we are bringing Atul up from the Mid-County team where he did focus a lot on the design and implementation of some of the work that they were doing in that team to the Director's Office to focus on a number of new initiatives that we have, but also some ones that we are responding to through ZTAs or through some of the initiatives that the department has been working on. The first one is really having some oversight in the in our biohealth priority campus planning that we're doing, because we established a team that would review applications when they come in, and we do have one that will be coming in this summer. And he will be providing not only the design guidance, but the oversight for the teams as we move ahead with those, because if this board recalls, that is on a very accelerated time frame from the traditional planning that we do. But it will also focus on the design of a lot of those campus plans that we got. Secondly, and I think very importantly, is our placemaking initiative. We started placemaking initiatives when it came out of a Silver Spring work that we were doing probably close to 10 years ago. And there were some things that came out of that placemaking initiative in Silver Spring. And the money that we had allocated at that time was really only devoted to Silver Spring. That expanded to Bethesda, then to White Flint, and then we said that really needs to be department-wide. It needs to be county-wide as well. And so, of course, some of the major events that we have undertaken have been around Randolph Hills, Burtonsville. We've done some things in Long Branch, Silver Spring, Bethesda, and one of Atul's roles is going to be coming up with a strategic plan for placemaking. And I think we've struggled with that because we've tried to make that more organic to where we have people come to us, where we can work with Better Block as one of the roles that we've used, and I think that was evident with Fairland Briggs Cheney meeting last night. But this is something that we can really plan out for the next couple years in terms of how we want to promote placemaking, but promote it equitably across the county, which is what we've really been trying to do. So he will be taking on that role, and I think one of the other key roles that he will also be working on is our update to the CR benefit, public benefit points and guidelines that will be starting sometime this fall. And that's one of the items that's on our work program right now. So I'm really excited to have Atul come on board. This is something I think that department-wide we've really needed, and he fits the bill, so to speak. So I'll turn it over to Atul, but I know Gwen and I are very excited to have him come on board.
Thank you, Robert and Gwen, for the record. Atul Sharma in the Director's Office. As the Director and the Deputy Director just mentioned, there's a variety of efforts that we'll be undertaking in the coming years that really require all the teams to come together and have conversations around either regulatory review projects or our priorities around policies related to placemaking. So I'm really excited to contribute to that effort and work with the different area teams. I think we've already hit the ground running, and we are working on regulatory reviews, on talking about placemaking, on crafting an objective approach to updating our CR public benefit point system. Each of these is going to be a good comprehensive project, and I'm looking forward to doing my best to really contributing heartily to it. So thank you for the opportunity, and I'm excited about it.
So great. So let's talk a little bit about placemaking. And
I think Atul should, I think his job description say, assistant to the deputy in charge of making sure that the planning department produces all killer, no filler. Right? That's his,
That's our goal.
yeah.
We need bigger cards then. I think, to
Yeah.
make that happen.
The all killer, no filler guy.
No, that's great. So if we could go, thank you for finding the PowerPoint, everyone. I appreciate that. And if we could go to about the third slide. Yep, this is good. So we just want to talk a little bit about placemaking, and it's something that started way back in like 2014 when we did a series of workshops in Silver Spring about placemaking ideas, and some of those ideas and some of the murals and things that were talked about in that placemaking effort have happened. In fact, I think the whole shared streets conversation and implementation has really moved a lot of that placemaking, those concepts that we had forward. We've done significant placemaking events in Randolph Hills, Burtonsville, the Pike District area, and White Flint. We've worked closely with Long Branch. And you're going to hear more about what's going to be coming up in Farrell, Briggs, Cheney. Next. Next slide, please. Yeah, we've been very fortunate to get some set money in our annual budget each year for placemaking activities. And that has really enabled us to expand these efforts to communities throughout the county. We wanted to make sure that we weren't just doing up county or down county or east county or west county, but that we were really doing activities in all parts of the county. Because from the get-go, we've talked about our goal in the planning department is to really celebrate the best urban, the best suburban, and the best rural parts of the county. So I think our placemaking activities have been able to reflect that. And here you see images from, Randolph Hills, from Burtonsville, from Long Branch, from the Pike District, really from all over. Next. I'm going to sort of talk a little bit about my own observations, but I'm going to ask both Robert and Atul to chime in on this. I think that they've been really well received, and that they have helped lead us to some long-term change in communities. I was talking about how in Silver Spring, some of those early placemaking ideas led to some of the murals, I think, have been implemented as part of the shared streets idea. One of the things that we are talking about and that we're really focused on is that our placemaking needs to not just be a fun community festival. We can always do fun community festivals. Our placemaking needs to be closely tied to urban design and planning goals that we have for different parts of the county. They are big, big efforts, and we want big, big benefits. I don't know if Robert or Atul would like to add to that.
Sure. So, to add on to the urban design goals, we have been, in the past, we've taken the master plans and identified in the master plans what where the focus was for improvement, whether that was a town center or whether it was a community space, and really tried to build on the master plan goals, some of which have, are a lot older. And so I think our thinking has changed on how some of these ideas would be implemented. Fairland Brigg Cheney is one that we are kind of doing in tandem or in concert with the placemaking initiative as we look at visioning for those two areas. One of the things that a tool brings to the table is a bigger focus on the urban design component of it. And we have, while we love working with Better Block, we're finding that their time is harder for us to get secured. We called them to work on Fairland Briggs Cheney, and their first response was, "We don't have the staff for it." So it might have to kick out another 6 months. And so I think one of the things that we're going to start looking at is, are there other firms similar to Better Block that provide the same service, that provide as good service, better service, and that have a focus on urban design? And so while we love working with them, and they've provided a tremendous service to us, I think we can look at other avenues to really broaden and kind of diversify what we're doing. As we look, we now have communities coming to us saying, "We like what happened in Burtonsville. We like what happened in White Flint. How do we get that?" And so I think it's been great because it starts to do what we originally planned, was make it a community event and have the community come to us to say, "This is what we really want to see in our community." Tool, I don't know if you want to add anything to that.
Just a couple of observations. I think one, I really wanted to reinforce what was mentioned earlier, that a lot of these placemaking efforts have been interim sort of interventions that we have done with Better Block, with our partners in parks and DOT, but they've each led to long-term change. And that is, I think, so important for us to keep as a criteria. For example, the Randolph Hill Civic Association and the shopping center now have an ad hoc sort of agreement that allows the neighborhood to use that space that we sort of envisioned with the community as a civic green. In fact, if you go to Google Maps, they've pinned that space as the Randolph Hill Civic Green, which is a direct reflection of the long-term vision for the sector plan for that area. In Burtonsville, there are studies going on now to see how that 6-lane section of Old Columbia Pike can be narrowed down to 2 or 3 lanes, which is another idea that came out of that placemaking effort. And the property owner of that shopping center is evaluating redevelopment scenarios that take into account a lot of those things that were kind of put on display in that sort of week where we sort of implemented things with in partnership with parks and the community. Similarly, in the Pike District Connector, and we just sort of heard of this yesterday, exciting news, MCDOT is seeing how the Bethesda Trolley Trail can be better connected to the regional system of trails. And that was one of the key ideas in that interim sort of placemaking intervention that we did in partnership with DOT. So I think a lot of times we sort of start small, but we are lighting sort of the flame, being catalysts for long-term change. And that's been really great to see that a lot of our projects are achieving that sort of very critical goal.
Okay, let's look at the next slide and just talk a little bit about what's happening with our fiscal year 22 money. I'm going to let Robert talk about that.
So we have, for the past 2 or 3 years, we've been providing funds to Long Branch for their Long Branch Festival. And this is great because the Long Branch Better Business group has come to us to say, we have this entire thing planned, but we need the money. We need the funds to make it happen. And we've been able to give them money each year out of the placemaking efforts to host the festival, host the events, and we've participated in those as well. For the second time, we are contributing to another mural on one of the parking garages in Bethesda. This is the one at Old Georgetown and Woodmont. And these have been very successful. And it's great that Bob reaches out to us to see if we can participate with them and assist with that, not just financially, but just in the promotion of Bethesda. And I know I sent the the recent, I think it was the Fox 5 ticker that interviewed Jeff Burton in Bethesda, and he highlighted the mural, and so that's one of the ones that we are helping with. Silver Spring Transit Center, we've dedicated some of the placemaking funds for a charrette that would really focus on the outcomes of the Silver Spring Downtown and Adjacent Communities Plan, with a primary focus and attention on what can happen within the transit center. This board may recall that the county put out an RFP many years ago and didn't have a whole lot of interest. We are trying to revive that with a lot of the ideas and the goals and the recommendations from the plan. And then lastly, we have Farrell and Briggs Cheney, which was kicked off last night in an event with not only the regional director, but some of the new players that we have in Fairland and some that really want to shine a light on what not only the Department of Rec has to offer, our Parks Department, but also the Regional Services Center to really highlight a lot of what this community needs, but also what they embody. So these are
The next image actually is of Farrell and Briggs Cheney.
Okay.
If we could go to the next slide, you can see
Yes.
the location of where the placemaking event is going to be, right there near the East County Community Center. Okay, next slide. One of Atul's big projects, again, is going to be working towards a strategic plan for placemaking. We've been very opportunistic up to this point, and we've done events where it seemed like we had a good opportunity, but we want to make sure we're being strategic. So I'm going to let Atul talk a little bit about how we're going to create a strategic plan for placemaking.
Sure. Thank you, Gwen. And this is, again, a very exciting part of the work program that I hope to contribute to. As Gwen mentioned, we've been sort of nimble and opportunistic in the past 4 to 5 years in identifying sort of sites and projects and reacting to them. I think one of the big goals of this effort would be to look back at the past 4 to 5 years, take the lessons learned from that, and then really get more proactive and more future-looking towards how we want to guide the conversation around placemaking. This will be an internal working effort for the department, so we hope to convene the different divisions and really talk around some of these overarching questions as to what should be the role of the department, for example, towards placemaking. Should we be leading it and leading it like we've done with the Better Block Foundation and community groups, or should we be supporting other groups like we've done in Long Branch? Should we be advocating it through hosting seminars, lectures, workshops, or should we be working with private property owners to implement some placemaking ideas like have been done in projects like the Strathmore Station or Pike and Rose? Depending on what type of roles rise to the top in that conversation, we then want to talk a little bit about priorities. Placemaking can be a very broad concept, and a lot of different things can fit under it. So we want to have a more targeted approach to it that identifies things like, do we want to activate public spaces to support economic development? Do we want to program underutilized parks and public spaces so that they build social capital or lead to more equitable health outcomes? Do we want to use environmental placemaking as a way to showcase resilience? Or do we want to focus more on the cultural diversity of the county and work on projects that showcase arts and things like the mural that Robert just talked about? Based on these two discussions, we then, I think, will have a much clearer idea of what type of specific projects we should be taking on in the coming years, whether these are streetscape-related projects or art-related projects or public space-related projects. And then last, but also very important, is we've followed a few models of implementation for placemaking so far. We've worked with the consultant. We've supported some neighborhood groups through design support and some seed funding, if you will. But other jurisdictions have done things differently, like giving placemaking grants or applying for national grants and then dispersing those funds through different neighborhood groups like DC did a few years ago. So all of these, we hope, will then lead to a strategic plan. If we can go to the last slide here. that will create a shared vision for the department's role and priorities. It will identify potential models for implementing placemaking projects. It will also provide some guidance in leveraging our investments to find matching investments and grants and build relationships with agencies that we work with, some that we haven't worked with yet. And the hope is that once this strategic plan is in place, then it starts to proactively guide our annual work program around placemaking and guide our staff as they undertake different projects. So that's the sort of overall idea behind this effort, and we'll be working internally with the different teams to get their take on the lessons learned and how they want to use placemaking as a planning tool in the future. So we're all very excited around it, and I think this will lead to some really great work building on our already awesome efforts that we've done in the past 5 to 6 years.
And just to add one more thing to that is what we haven't had is really a point person to be the kind of the guru for our placemaking. And I think with a tool stepping in and helping guide the vision, but also be able to coordinate with the teams is of critical need and importance for us. And just as a teaser for upcoming placemaking efforts, we have been coordinating with not only Damascus, but Olney, and Germantown has been reaching out to us quite a bit. We meet with them monthly to talk about some of their ideas. So we have definitely broadened our scope, and we'll continue to do so with a tool's help. So thank you.
And with that, that is the end of the planning director's report for today. I always enjoy sharing with the board different projects like placemaking that you may not hear about on a day-to-day basis, but that we're very busy with in the planning department. If you have questions, I'd be glad to take them.
Maybe you're going to mention, but tomorrow's your planning picnic. Is that right?
Oh, yes, for
You were gonna
staff,
mention that.
there is a planning department picnic tomorrow, and we're looking forward to it. Hopefully, fingers crossed, good weather.
Good. When I was younger, my placemaking place was Journal Square in Jersey City. It was very dynamic, movie theaters, people gathering. But that relates, given they had transit connection, relates a little bit to Silver Spring. There was a previous effort to have additional development there. I was on a proposal submitted to WMATA. So are they looking for an office building or residential, or are they amenable to some placemaking?
Yeah, right now what we're doing is actually what I call an invited design charrette. We've brought 3 nationally known architects in to take a look at the whole transit center area and the property immediately surrounding it, and to give us very, very creative ideas. Given all the transportation infrastructure in that area, it's become a challenging place to think about how to develop it. And so we are going to have these 3 nationally known architects give us concepts. It's not necessarily going to focus on whether it's residential or commercial or hotel, but we're going to debut those 3 ideas at our Makeover Montgomery conference that's being held in September. These 3 firms are going to work on this over the course of the summer, come up with their most creative ideas, and then we'll debut this at Makeover Montgomery. And we hope that it will spark interest in that site from the private sector to take a look at how a development might happen in that very, very challenged area.
Yeah, there's a new general manager, so involving
Yes,
WMATA,
we
that
have
would be great, yeah.
been in close contact with WMATA on this project and with the county as well,
right,
to make
good.
sure that they all know it's happening and they're all
Yeah.
in support of it.
Yeah. Just the other question on Burtonsville, there was speculation whether the Montgomery College, a branch there in the 29 corridor, might go there, might go somewhere else. The issue was that a lot of people live in the county, they work at Fort Meade and other places, national security. Coming home, it was a place to maybe stop and take classes, or is that a place-making place, so to
The
speak?
conversation about Montgomery College in East County is still ongoing. I
Okay.
don't think any decision has been made. However, the good news is that we have begun to have some conversations with the owner of the shopping center, who is looking at a potential revitalization
Very good.
of the shopping center as a shopping center.
Good.
And so, again, all of these ideas are very much in their infancy. They're just being discussed, but we'll definitely keep the board apprised.
Well, you put it in good hands, so should look
We're
forward
very
to it.
happy with
Yeah.
Atul joining the director's office.
I had some comments. First of all, just wanted to congratulate Atul Sharma coming out of AAPI month. It's always wonderful to see. It wasn't that long ago that you immigrated to this country, so moving up, it's part of the American dream. So congratulations on your new position. So just, with regards to placemaking, it is such an important tool. I got my start in civic activism doing placemaking in Montgomery Hills. The festival that I was able to put together had 700 people show up after we shut down a portion of the road. But it gets people excited, and it gives people an idea of this is what you can do in your neighborhood, even if it's not currently pedestrian friendly, so to speak. So I think that the work that you're doing, you're kind of taking it to the next level. I think going from like a festival model to actual vision work and creating a form of economic development where you're actually bringing the different partners together is going to be critical. And it's a pretty dynamic process when you really break it down. Looking at some of the placemaking opportunities that you mentioned, going back to what I mentioned with Montgomery Hills, places where there is blight, I think you may want to think about maybe going a little bit back to the festival model just to get people engaged, because in those scenarios, in this particular case, SHA is really the larger piece here, and we just need to keep the community engaged to the extent that they can continue to provide the support that we need to ensure that change does come to certain places. So I think that's one of the things that you should think about when you're moving forward, is that there are other places where the components are just not there. And so, for instance, if we do acquire the 16th Street Urban Park parcel, that's an opportunity to combine efforts with the Parks Department, shutting down maybe that slip lane on 16th Street, maybe have a festival there in conjunction with at the park. Things like that can get attention going with SHA, maybe even inviting them and saying, look, it's not the end of the world, let's get this started. Other things, we mentioned WMATA, the WMATA parcel in White Flint. It's just such a huge piece of property. And I know that they would be more than willing to clear out some of the land or make it accessible to the public. But getting people excited about that is huge. Many people don't even know it's there because you walk by it and you can't even see it. But once you're actually on the property, you realize how large it is. It's absurd how large it is and where it's located. The other obvious one is the Lerner property, which I know probably has a lot of dynamics associated with it. But I think that's another parcel that everyone drives by and says, why isn't anything happening here? And there's a lot of reasons why nothing has happened there, and we won't go into it right now. But I do think it's worth approaching them even and saying hey, we have some synergy. This is what we've done in the past. This is what we could do, just to get people excited about it. Also here, just across the street, what's happening with Westfield and the mall and the transition to malls going into more kind of town center kind of approaches. Veers Mill, this whole section is so complicated. And, in a perfect world, if I could wave a magic wand, I would give Veers Mill a road diet and I would create a more pedestrian place, but we know that's difficult. So I think having that kind of energy here would also be helpful. And then other places that come to mind are Kensington. Kensington is another place where I see so much potential. There are properties there that are just not activated, but they're surrounded by really cute, the antique little street there and some of the other places where you're starting to see development pop up. There are adjoining parcels that could have more there, but there just isn't activity going on. And then finally, looking at all of this, there seems to be nothing really going on in Up County. And so it would be great if we could try to see if we can find something where we see more of the placemaking happening over there. I think in those areas, because there is a lot of new development happening, that there may not be a need, but there are some random spots where, for whatever reason, we haven't seen a whole lot of action. But thank you again. This is true economic development, so I really appreciate the work you guys are doing.
Yeah, with some of the things Parthap said reminded me, I think it would be good to formally include parks in this process. And that's both at the level of like programming, and we have succeeded in adding a number of park staff who are engaged full-time in park activation and the programming of underutilized park spaces, especially in urban areas. And I think that kind of dovetails with what you're trying to do with Better Block. And also just the use of and improvement of the physical space that the Parks Department owns, and again, especially in the urban areas. The second thing is, Parthap had mentioned a couple places, and, like Kensington, I think Kensington actually is challenging just because some of the properties are on extremely busy streets. It's very hard to, even where you could envision space being available, it's hard to imagine how that could be made more pleasant for people to be on foot or participating in programming. But by all means, give it a look. There are some places that are less. They're not places you think of as being like a central business district or a major intensively developed area, but do have the potential to be more of a focal point, and like Clarksburg, for example. And Parks Department actually owns this piece of land that I think is supposedly called something like Clarksburg Triangle Urban Park. You know what I'm talking about? And that's a patch of ground that I think DOT and SHA have wound up trying to build roads through it and or over the edges of it, and it has, I think, some archaeological value. But in any event, it's basically an open. It looks kind of like a vacant lot that's kind of overgrown, and those kind of spaces that are proximate to or intended to be at some point a focal point for a community center. I think have some potential as well. Not just the parks that we've actually developed, but sometimes park land exists in places that if you were to at least mow back the vegetation, you might be able to run some programming that would be in a center of some population. Anyone else?
Yeah.
Oh, I'm sorry. I didn't mean to jump in front of you.
That's fine.
Go ahead.
I just turned my mic on. Thank you. Mr. Sharma, first and foremost, congratulations. Worked with you several years, and I look forward to your work on the biohealth and life sciences. This is an area that's gotten a lot of focus, and I think both your creativity as well as your energy will be most welcome in this area. As you heard last week, we talked a lot about various other regions that are compared to Montgomery County, and I think with your perspective as well as your strong research skills, you'll be able to bring some other aspects to this process that we haven't previously thought about. As it relates to the strategic plan, I liked what you talked about. I'm hoping that you'll come back to the planning board and talk about how at the areas that you mentioned for strategic, for placemaking, whether that's resilience, economic development, arts, environmental placemaking, instead of looking at them as siloed areas, look at them as where there's overlap. I think New York City is a good example of how placemaking has incorporated these aspects, and I think we can leverage that here as well. Some of the areas that were previously mentioned by my colleague, I think, are perfect examples of where we can integrate the economic development, the environmental placemaking, but also talk about resilience. I'm specifically interested in hearing you talk about, and this applies to any strategic plan, what the review and update will be. I know you mentioned the strategic plan would be part of the annual work update, but in the true sense of a strategic plan, there's a review and accountability process. So when you come back to talk about the strategic plan, would you please incorporate that so that we get a sense of, as part of this nimble, or and I'll use the IT phrase, agile, how do we make our placemaking more agile and responsive? Again, looking forward to working with you.
Okay, time to turn to item 5, I think. We're ready for item 5, 8015 Old Georgetown Road Site Plan Amendment with Grace Bogdan.
Thank you. Good morning, members of the Planning Board. Grace Bogdan with Down County Planning, lead reviewer for Site Plan Amendment 8, 2020, 013B. This is a rather straightforward amendment, so staff did not prepare a presentation for you today. As this approval stands, the approval allows for a new mixed-use building, which includes residential and live-work units. And this approval was approved by the Planning Board in July of 2021. And at that time, the Department of Housing and Community Affairs did not want any of the live-work units to be designated as MPDUs. Therefore, we had put Condition 23B as such to expressly not allow those live-work units to be counted as MPDUs. Over the past year, the applicant has been working very closely with DHCA to address their concerns, and now the agency is supportive of allowing live-work units to be counted as MPDUs. Therefore, staff is recommending that 23B be removed with this amendment. And the agency, DHCA, is recommending approval of it, and that's staff's presentation. We're available for questions.
Okay, I see Aaron Gerard is here. Do you have anything to say before we look for questions and comments from the board, Mr. Gerard?
Only if you have any questions. Thank you.
Great. Are there questions or comments or a motion? Anyone?
You need a motion?
That'd be great.
Jerry says you have a motion to approve.
I'll second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? That is approved.
Mr. Chair, I'm gonna abstain because I missed the presentation.
Right. Okay. So that's approved, and we're ready for item 11. Just enough time. We just did enough time to confuse Carol on the IT for the next item. That was the whole point of that exercise. See you in a minute. We're now ready for item 11, the Planning Board's annual briefing on updates to the Montgomery County burial sites inventory with Brian Crane.
Good morning. Could you bring up my slides, please? Or do I do that from here? Okay. Can you? I have the PowerPoint up on this computer. Sorry. Thank you. Good morning. For the record, I'm Brian Crane, the staff archaeologist with the Historic Preservation Program of the Planning Department, and I'm here to present the third annual update to the Montgomery County Burial Sites Inventory. Staff recommends that the Planning Board approve the proposed updates to the inventory. The outline for my presentation this morning, give an introduction to the overall program, go into some details about the updates, the specific updates that are included this year, and then other burial sites program activities that have been going on and continue. The inventory was created by the Montgomery County Council in 2017, and guidelines for its implementation approved by the Planning Board in 2019 provide for the inventory to be continuously updated as new information becomes available, and for the Planning Board to be briefed on these updates annually. There are two county ordinances related to the inventory, one that calls for the Planning Department to maintain and make the inventory public, and a second that requires that cemetery boundaries be defined during Planning Board approval of preliminary plans. Including this year's updates, the inventory includes 351 total records, including 249 known locations, 84 approximate locations, and 18 where we don't have enough information yet to map them. There are 15 redacted locations. Some locations are redacted to protect sites vulnerable to vandalism. In MC Atlas, the location is shown as the outline of the containing parcel if it's a redacted location. This slide lists the substantive changes to the inventory made this year, including sites that were moved or added, or where the location confidence was updated. Administrative changes included updating the names of 2 cemeteries to better reflect the history of the sites. As required by the burial sites guidelines, property owners were notified in writing by certified mail about substantive changes to burial sites inventory records on their property. As an aside, the individual changes are included as a table in the staff report. Note that Gibson Grove AME Zion Church Cemetery, being added this year, is separate from the Morning Star Tabernacle number 88 cemetery, also in Gibson Grove. Archaeological investigations carried out around the church by MDOT SHA found evidence for burials near the church. Most of the changes to the inventory this year are the result of a systematic review of Maryland Inventory of Historic Places forms. MIHP forms are the standard field documentation forms submitted to the Maryland Historical Trust and made available to the public via the internet. Over the previous couple of years, we found several instances of cemeteries mentioned in MIHP forms, but not included in the inventory, suggesting that no one had ever reviewed all the MIHP forms for the county. Since there are over 2,600 of these, and the average form is at least 5 to 10 pages long, a systematic review would involve reading tens of thousands of pages of material. Staff obtained from the Maryland Historical Trust copies of 2,620 MIHP forms for the Montgomery County in searchable PDF format. This allowed a systematic computer search of the tens of thousands of pages in those forms for keywords such as cemetery or cemeteries, grave, or burial. This search identified 18 MIHP forms that referenced family burial grounds not currently in the inventory. Close examination of these sites produced 13 new locations to add to the inventory this year. Research continues on the remaining 5 sites, which may be included in future updates. Staff conducted deed research to map historical farm boundaries, historical maps, and aerial photographs in conjunction with the predictive model developed in 2020 to help refine potential locations for these burial sites. And the slide shows the location of all of the updates included in this year. I'm going to go over one of this year's updates, the Conway Jackson Cemetery in Fairland, to illustrate the research process we used. This site was already listed in the inventory, but we believe incorrectly mapped. I used what we have learned about the typical location setting of family cemeteries to help identify a more probable location. A History of Burtonsville, published in 1976 by Audrey Lord, describes a cemetery once on the property of Randy Roby, purportedly in the pathway for the realignment of US 29. And that, I didn't ask it to do that. Sorry. Her informant, Roy Miles, remembered between 100 and 150 stone markers he believed were associated with people once held in slavery, including Griff Conway and Emma Jackson. Historical research conducted by Mncppc as part of the ICC project shows that Emma Jackson was the daughter of Melinda Jackson, who purchased the cabin where she and her family had been enslaved from her former enslaver, Ann Downs, in 1869. Griffin Conway was a boarder who lived with the Jacksons on their property. Both the Jackson homestead discovered by Mncppc archaeologists and the likely Conway-Jackson Cemetery location are located on land that once belonged to Ann Downs. The farmstead shown on this slide is part of the larger Downs estate, including her farmhouse, later owned by O'Dorian Roby. To find a probable location of their graves, I mapped the boundaries of the Roby farm onto an aerial photograph taken a few years before Columbia Pike was moved. Based on research we reported onto the board last year, we learned that family burial grounds tended to be within a few hundred feet of the house and on a geographical prominence, such as a small hill or terrace edge. In this case, examining the original topography of the farm within a few hundred feet of the farmhouse shows there is a likely area about 250 feet north of the house and on a stream terrace that highway plans indicate was also used as an orchard. There are other examples elsewhere in the county of burial grounds being sited near or subsequently used as orchards. And this location also fits the information that it was reportedly destroyed when US 29 was moved. We don't have any information yet about what happened to the graves, but Miles told Lord that descendants were not found at the time the highway was built in 1955 and that the cemetery was destroyed. Subsequent historical research done by Mncppc has learned that there are, in fact, descendants still living in the area. The cemetery is probably within a Maryland State Highway right-of-way, so field investigation by archaeologists is a challenge unless there is a major project to change the road. Hopefully, further research into Maryland State Highway files and conversations with community members and descendants may find clues about what happened to the graves. The Avery Road Cemetery was an African-American community cemetery in Rockville that had been recorded as an approximate site. Review of historical deed records suggested that the volunteer mapped location was slightly off. A visit to the location indicated by real property records found physical evidence of a cemetery, including a headstone base shown here, as well as several large depressions suggesting places where graves had been exhumed and a former structure demolished. This evidence had not been previously identified by volunteer recorders. This has allowed us to update the location to known and apprise Rockville Planning of better information for the management of the site. The current inventory includes at least 17 cemeteries that have been at least partially exhumed, and the update includes 4 cemeteries that have purportedly been exhumed. We have included these sites in the inventory from its inception for several reasons. The text of the law creating the burial sites inventory defines a burial site as, quote, a physical location where human remains were buried in the earth or entombed in a mausoleum or columbarium, end quote. We include the original locations of exhumed cemeteries because historical and archaeological research shows that exhumations to physically move cemeteries are frequently incomplete, and it is likely that burials remain in the original location. This possibility is particularly an issue for graves of people held in slavery. Prior to emancipation, the graves of people held in slavery may have been in or near the burial grounds of their enslavers, but possibly unmarked, marked with perishable materials, or marked with unmodified fieldstones that may not obviously be grave markers. There are numerous examples of incomplete cemetery removals in the region. The Riggs family moved their ancestors' remains from their family plot to St. John's Cemetery in Olney when they sold their property in 1930. But more burials were found in unmarked graves in 1981 during development of the former farm into the Oaks landfill. Snowden Funeral Home moved these graves to the Poor Farm. Among the updates included this year, the Dunlop family graves were moved in 1926. However, during subsequent residential development, additional graves were reported from the same location, interpreted at the time as possibly being those the family had once enslaved. Another important example of an incompletely moved cemetery was documented by archaeologists for MDOT-SHA in neighboring Prince George's County. The Simon Hill Cemetery in Hyattsville was purportedly moved 50 years ago, but archaeologists working in 2017 found dozens of graves left behind. The largest such case in the region involves Columbian Harmony Cemetery, an African-American cemetery in Washington, D.C. that once held thousands of interments. According to my colleague, D.C. archaeologist Ruth Trocoli, Columbia Harmony was moved between 1959 and 1960, and a court-appointed monitor supervised the opening of every burial plot for the remains to be collected and boxed for the move in a land swap deal with a developer. Everything else associated with burials was specifically excluded from the move, so headstones, coffins, markers, etc. were left in place. A recent project impacted a very small portion, about a third of an acre, of the original over 30-acre property. Associated archaeological investigations found 279 interments or coffins in that location. Of those, only 36 had no human remains. At least 75 had fully articulated remains, and virtually every plot still had coffin or cemetery furniture, headstones, etc. One of the reasons we are concerned about exhumed family burial sites is the possibility that there may have been additional graves nearby, potentially including the graves of people once enslaved. We know that many burial sites associated with enslaved African-American people in Montgomery County are likely missing from the inventory. Currently, there are only 18 known burial sites in the Montgomery County inventory thought to have been associated with people held in slavery, including the Button Farm Cemetery shown at left, but there must have been many more. The research and data we compiled on enslavers in Montgomery County for the street renaming project is helping us understand in a detailed way where people were held in slavery in the county. We're using those data together with the information in the burial sites inventory to help better understand the location and settings for the burial sites of enslaved people to better predict where we might find others. Possibilities for places to expect the burial sites of people held in slavery include locations within or immediately adjacent to but separate from the burial plots of slaveholding families, entirely separate burial locations within the boundaries of farms where people were held in slavery, and black community cemeteries established by free blacks before the Civil War. Among the latter is the Spencer Family Cemetery, established in the early 1800s, shown in this photograph. Shown here is an example from neighboring Prince George's County. This is the grave of Basil and Elizabeth Wood, who were held in slavery by the Bowie family and who continued to work for them after the Civil War. They were ultimately buried in the Bowie family plot when they died in the 1920s. In Montgomery County, the Cook family burial ground includes the graves of members of the Cook family who held numerous people in slavery. In addition to the elaborately inscribed grave markers of the white slave-owning family, there are several unmodified fieldstone grave markers for unknown individuals, such as the two shown here. Perhaps some of these could have been for people the white family held as slaves. Careful mapping of other family burial grounds in the county may identify additional places where there is a mix of inscribed and uninscribed stones, or clearly marked graves with unmarked grave depressions nearby that could be associated with the graves of people held in slavery. Administrative changes were intended to improve the maintenance of the inventory. Historic preservation staff worked with IT staff to migrate the burial sites inventory to Hansen in order to better integrate the burial sites data in a single system that is sustainable for the long term. The inventory originally consisted of information stored in 3 places: a GIS database, volunteer-generated PDF forms, and additional information in an MS Access database. We worked with Steve Carey to build a database within Hansen and design new forms. This has allowed for all the information to be consolidated in one place. Staff have created a new information form that pulls data from Hansen and are in the process of completing individual forms for all the cemetery records and developing a way to synchronize edits between GIS and Hansen. The initial data migration into Hansen was from our GIS system. However, the data in the associated GIS attribute table only included part of what is available. Additional information is available in an MXS database and on forms generated by Montgomery Preservation volunteers in 2018. Hansen is designed to store all of that information, critically including photographs and other images. But those data essentially need to be entered by hand. Karen Yee, a University of Maryland student in historic preservation, worked on entering data into Hansen, completing the detailed data entry for 74 existing sites. I entered all of the data for the new or revised forms. We hope to be able to complete the data entry over the next year or so, focusing on new or changed inventory forms. We are also considering whether to revise how approximate cemetery sites are displayed to the public via MC Atlas. Currently, MC Atlas does not display approximate points when the user is zoomed in closer than a scale of 1 to 50,000, in order to avoid creating a false sense of precision. Because most of the approximate cemetery sites in the inventory are family burial grounds, one possibility is to use what we have learned about how family cemeteries are sited in relationship to the family house, farm boundaries, and topography to display a probability area in the MC Atlas when a user is zoomed in at a scale of less than 1 to 50,000. These images show what that might look like zoomed in close to two of the cemeteries in this year's update: Moneysworth near Clarksburg and the Conway Jackson Cemetery near Fairland. The yellow shaded circular area represents the region our research suggests is most likely to contain the site. In these cases, it is centered on the historic house location. The blue line on the image at right is the historical boundary of a farmstead believed once to have contained the Conway Jackson Cemetery. I use the farm boundary to clip the probability area, since the cemetery would not have been located off the historical property. Historic preservation staff have continued reviewing several projects that may affect sites on the burial sites inventory. The image on this slide shows the site of the Morningstar Tabernacle No. 88 Cemetery in Cabin John. Staff have been reviewing potential effects from the Maryland Lanes project to the Managed Lanes project to the Moses Hall Cemetery site. Mncppc is a consulting party for the project under Section 106 of the National Historic Preservation Act. The cemetery is a large African-American burial ground associated with Morningstar Tabernacle No. 88, Grand United Order, Brothers and Sisters, Sons and Daughters of Moses. It is located immediately adjacent to the Beltway right-of-way. Staff continue to meet with the descendants and members of the Cabin John community about their concerns regarding the cemetery site and have offered MDOT-SHA constructive criticism about its efforts to research the site and assess the effects of the proposed project to the cemetery. Along with the National Trust for Historic Preservation and the Friends of Moses Hall, we have urged MDOT-SHA to consider the cumulative effects of the Beltway to the community from its original construction, but without success. MDOT-SHA has responded to the criticisms it has received from staff, the Maryland Historical Trust, and community by improving its field efforts at the site, but insists on evaluating new effects to the site as narrowly as possible. Historic preservation staff routinely perform field visits to publicly accessible cemetery sites in the burial sites inventory in an effort to confirm or improve map locations and learn more about how small family, church, and community cemeteries are sited and laid out. Staff visited 19 sites on or under consideration for listing in the inventory since the last inventory update in 2021. Staff have visited 81 sites listed in the inventory since the program was initiated in 2018, accounting for approximately 1/4 of the total sites. Above, planning staff meet in the field with Eric Ledbetter of the Department of Natural Resources in Patuxent State Park to look for evidence of the Hilton family cemetery. We didn't find direct evidence, but visiting the landscape around the family farmstead gave us a good idea of where it might have been. Historic preservation staff are regularly contacted by members of the public about cemeteries in the inventory or with inquiries about cemeteries not yet in the inventory. We provide what information we have available, and when local historians or descendants offer new information, we update the inventory as appropriate. We recently received information about a cemetery near Etchison from a resident, for example. Actually, we've received 3 new potential sites in the last week or two, so you'll be probably hearing about those next year. We will investigate these sites and bring those to the board during a future update as appropriate. We also received an inquiry about the real estate parcel for the Jerusalem Mount Pleasant United Methodist Church Cemetery in Norbeck. Parks and planning staff reviewed parcel maps, deeds, and other information that showed the cemetery is within its own parcel and was not correctly recorded in SDAT and shown in our GIS. The parcel boundaries have been corrected, though additional research may be needed to fully identify the current owner. So we've been working with SDAT to make sure that the information shown in state records and in our own GIS information is correct. We have also received requests for information about how to use photogrammetry to record headstone inscriptions. Outreach efforts since the last update have included contacting property owners and managing agencies of newly added cemetery sites through certified mail and responding to inquiries about these additions. Staff included cemetery history information as part of Fairland and Briggs Cheney Master Plan, existing conditions information. Staff participated with regional archaeologists in a panel conversation sponsored by the Montgomery County Remembrance and Reconciliation Commission on May 14th of last month. This panel was designed to help members of the public to research the location of African American family and community cemeteries. Staff prepared a short piece on the use of photogrammetry to record headstones for the Maryland Archaeology Month booklet prepared by the Maryland Historical Trust, and a blog post for the third place blog on the use of historical research to locate lost cemeteries. With COVID waning, we hope to get back to in-person education and training related to the program. In addition to regularly updating and maintaining the inventory, there are other initiatives underway to support the burial sites program. Staff continue working on identifying archaeological and cemetery sites that may merit consideration for addition to the master plan for historic preservation. Staff have also worked to identify and correct GIS data errors among the master plan data. For example, review of the Mount Nebo master plan historic site and associated cemetery showed that the map location of the master plan boundary was recorded incorrectly in the GIS. HP staff are working on identifying practical, non-invasive techniques for finding the approximate burial sites in the inventory. In addition to conducting archival research, primarily deed research, and archaeological reconnaissance, staff are developing proposals to partner with contractors, volunteers, and other community resources to use human remains detection dogs and geophysical survey, primarily ground-penetrating radar and magnetometer survey, potentially identify missing sites and pinpoint approximate sites. Again, this is the slide that shows the overall updates that we are asking the board to specifically approve this year. There's 20 of them. They are listed in a table in the staff report. 4 sites where we changed the location. 1 was changed from an approximate to a known site. 13 altogether new sites, and 2 administrative changes, essentially name changes.
Dr. Crane, is it okay to ask a question? Or do you want me to wait?
I'm almost finished.
Okay.
2 seconds. So we recommend that the planning board adopt the inventory update. And one last community note, we received notice that the Friends of Moses Hall are holding a cemetery cleanup activity at the Morningstar Moses Cemetery and Hall site on Saturday, June 25th. If anyone's interested in more details about that, they can contact me or the Friends of Moses Hall. And that's all I have. And so, yes, any questions?
I did have a question. Thank you again, Dr. Crean, for the presentation. First, before I ask the question, I want to commend you for the labor-intensive effort. The thousands of pages that you and your team have gone through, I know is no easy feat, considering that some of those documents go back to the 19th century, and handwriting was not always clear to read, and I'm sure with age it's gotten probably worse to decipher. I did have a question regarding one of the changes that you asked us about, and it's the last bullet regarding the unlikely, and I'm going to unsupported by evidence and unlikely. How long would you propose keeping that label of possibly enslaved person cemetery, given that you're saying it's unsupported by evidence and unlikely? You think a year we revisit this, or what's your suggestion?
So to clarify, it had been listed as a slave and Native American cemetery. And what I'm saying is that what we know about indigenous pre-European burial grounds in Montgomery County is that we would not expect one to be in that part of the county. We may be wrong, but the evidence that we have of those sites is that they are along the Potomac River and not on the east side of the county. And there are many essentially unsupported folk tales about, quote, Indian burial grounds that are really nothing more than that. And I didn't want a really misleading name to be in the inventory. So that was why I proposed that particular change. If we do subsequently find that there are evidence for indigenous burial grounds there or elsewhere in the county, we would probably redact that location for security reasons and work with the Maryland Commission on Indian Affairs to, on that. But in this case, we don't think it's likely.
Okay. Thank you.
We have a couple of people who are signed up to speak. I think Eileen McGuckian is online. Or did you want to say something before we turn to Ms. McGuckian?
Yeah. I wanted to, first of all, commend the staff on this effort. I just, it's very personal to me, in 2018, having traveled to my family, where my family came from in Ukraine and Lithuania. And one of the ways that we determined a lot of our family history was through visiting many mass graves and cemeteries and seeing what had been done over the years, particularly after, as part of the Nazi regime, to the Jewish cemeteries was quite disturbing. But seeing the efforts that are being made actually in Europe to bring those back and identify them is similar to what is happening here, and it's really important to those of us who are descendants and have had our family history desecrated in that way. So I really appreciate the efforts that are being made here. One question that I have is you talked about the Conway-Jackson cemetery and the impact that occurred where the location was a little bit different and certain graves were found at a later date that were as a result of the development of Route 29. And I'm just curious because I hear you on Dr. Crane on the issue related to the state highway current efforts to widen the beltway around where Gibson Grove is being impacted. And I guess my question is whether there's any evidence that potentially those two cemeteries, both the Gibson Grave, the one that you've identified as Gibson Grove, affiliated with the AME Church, as well as the Moses Morning Star, whether they were at some point tied together and have been split also because of the original Beltway construction, and whether during this project it makes sense to have during construction more intense, or if we could push for more intense research as to whether or not there are any existing graves or grave sites that are underneath the where the Beltway is currently located.
Thank you. We have continued to tell MDOT-SHA that we don't believe that the northern boundary of the Morningstar Tabernacle Cemetery has been fully defined. And they have said that they do plan to do additional investigations along the northern boundary, and we will do what we can to hold them to that and continue to ask for them to do those investigations and to review what reports we have. But it is an unknown possibility at this point. Yes.
I just want to make a
Thank you.
I want to make a quick comment, also commending you on all the hard work that you've done. I looked through the entire staff report and I saw many of the photographs were personally done by you, so I can only imagine going through every site and capturing them and memorializing them and putting in all the work for that is quite intensive process. So we appreciate the work that you've done. I just had a general question. Since we are talking about indigenous, Native American burial sites, how many are there in Montgomery County?
We currently only have 6 that are listed in the inventory, and those are based on archaeological investigations mostly done decades ago, like in the 1930s and 40s, and that are listed as archaeological sites in the Maryland Historical Trust files. Because archaeological site files are considered to be confidential and that such sites are at risk for vandalism, we have heavily redacted those locations.
Okay. So we don't know. They're not public for public consumption.
We don't make the precise locations of those sites public, but we do have that information available internally, so that if there are any projects that occur that are under planning department review, we can bring those issues forward.
Do you know which tribes are represented in those burial sites?
So that's actually a complicated question, because these burial grounds probably date to the 1400s. So we're talking about a couple of hundred years before Europeans arrived and the colonization of Maryland began. So archaeologists and historians believe that the ancestors of potentially multiple Algonquin-speaking groups in the Potomac River Valley lived north or interior from the fall line in the centuries prior to European arrival, and that as the Little Ice Age came on, there is some thought that there were really pretty dramatic movements of some groups that caused conflict within the Potomac River Valley, and archaeologists, at least, believe that what the Potomac River Valley in Montgomery County was actually more or less abandoned at that time, and that for security, to protect themselves, those people moved below the fall line to put the falls between them and Iroquoian-speaking people they referred to as the Massawomack from raiding their villages. The Massawomack is a word recorded by the English that the Algonquin used to describe an Iroquoian-speaking people that were probably indigenous to West Virginia and Western Pennsylvania, a group that we know almost nothing about because they were probably subsequently absorbed by the Five Nations Haudenosaunee Iroquois and in subsequent wars. In any case, they may have been ancestral to the Piscataway, the Potawatomi, and other Algonquin-speaking groups along the Potomac River Valley.
Okay, thank you.
Probably a longer answer than you were looking for.
It's fascinating to just understand the history and what we know today. And I know some of it's speculative in nature, but that's kind of to be expected. Thank you.
Okay, is Eileen McGuckie in there?
I am indeed.
Thanks for waiting.
Can you hear me?
Yes, thanks for waiting a week.
Okay, well, I waited a week, and I want you to know that I got dressed up this morning for my video appearance, so picture me with earrings and a dress. I don't do that very often.
You look great.
Okay, thank you. So do you. Eileen McGuckie, representing Montgomery Preservation, which sponsored the Cemetery Inventory Revisited project in 2018, as well as the legislation that led to the Planning Board's responsibilities for the burial sites inventory. And I thank you for taking this responsibility seriously and allowing me to continue the tradition of commenting when you receive your annual report. I first want to compliment Brian Crane. He continues to perform at a high professional level in his unique position, and you may know that only a handful of counties assign an individual to monitor, visit, protect, and preserve cemeteries. Brian keeps in touch with his colleagues. He assists with public forums on relevant topics, and as you heard, he participates in the Section 106 reviews on behalf of specific cemeteries affected by the Managed Lanes project, and that's a plural, to more than one cemetery. His blog is superb. Brian is a tenacious problem solver. He continues to find information tucked into other formats, long hidden away, and this year the issues that he tackled of unknown site ownership and unknown site locations and boundaries with his predictive model seem to be working. I want to report that interest in this entire project in this entire topic is broad and it's growing. Your inventory and the county laws are spurring local research efforts that are broadening understanding of our history and historic sites. Ongoing efforts are being made to get burial sites referenced on existing publicly available maps, such as tax maps. Volunteers are discovering documentary evidence of many more burials than are visible to the eye in some of our African American cemeteries. And one current example mentioned by Brian is Morningstar Tabernacle on Seven Locks Road in Cabin John, which is ID number 105. I am a little bit disappointed that public interaction and participation has been less than anticipated and planned. I know COVID interfered with promised workshops, seminars, educational sessions for property owners, but suggest it's time for staff to move in that direction. And I have a few other suggestions, many of which are doable by current staff and volunteers. I urge the board to encourage its preservation staff to conduct the background work in preparation for cemetery nominations to the Montgomery County Master Plan for Historic Preservation. To promote non-intrusive means of cemetery detection and delineation, as Brian mentioned, the ground-penetrating radar, human cadaver dogs, but mapping, collection of oral histories, all of these are necessary tools countywide that engender dialogue with descendant communities and enable accurate interpretation to the public. I suggest that you consider acquiring a GPR device and train a technician, or allocate funds for a contract expert as needed. Many advocates have requested and constantly continue doing that, scanning for their particular sites. Regarding Montgomery Parks, if a brochure could be created and public programs planned for burial sites under the jurisdiction of Montgomery Parks. The staff there acknowledge significance of 16 Parks-owned cemeteries and could use assistance with incorporated information into a preservation, use, maintenance, and operating plan for each of these sites. Brian mentioned consolidating information for individual site forms. This has been an ongoing thing, and it seems to change. I'm just going to say if this process can be sped up, that would be wonderful because, frankly, MC Atlas and Hansen data simply are not within most people's ken. I think it's time also, after 4 years, to consider additional legislation to protect Maryland burial sites that have already gone through or are not going through the subdivision process. And then lastly, I want to mention the growing state level of interest in African American burial sites, which in Maryland and Montgomery County constitute roughly 1/3 of all known sites. I participate in a working group that posted a draft report on the situations and needs of African American cemeteries. A link on MPI's website takes you to the draft report and an invitation to review and critique it before June 15th, when it will be submitted to the Maryland General Assembly. Also, there's House Bill 1088, which raises the amount of funding available for African American historic sites, including cemeteries. It passed both houses and now awaits the governor's signature. I was going to invite you to the cleanup day on June 25th. You will meet lots of descendants of Morningstar Tabernacle Cemetery working there. It's also 2022 Heritage Days, so there are lots of stops around the county that will be open, many of them cemeteries. Thank you for listening, and I'm happy to answer any questions you may have.
Thank you. Is Julianne, is it Mangin? Am I getting that right? Close? Come on up.
All right. So my name is Julianne Mangin, and I'm an independent researcher, writer, and local historian. And I'm here to report on research I've done on Mount Pleasant Methodist Church in Norbeck, which Brian briefly mentioned in his presentation, and it's number 111 in the burial sites inventory. From the end of slavery to the middle of the 20th century, Norbeck was an African American kinship community that was built around a church, a school, a fellowship lodge, and a cemetery. When Mount Pleasant Cemetery was surveyed in 2018, there were 28 visible markers with death dates ranging from 1893 to 1962. There are no cemetery records. Chiquita Sorrells, an African-American genealogist and member of Jerusalem Mount Pleasant Church, has led a project to research the history of the cemetery and the people buried there. During the past year, I have located 151 obituaries in the Evening Star for people that were buried at Mount Pleasant Cemetery. And in addition, I've begun a search of Maryland death certificates, and I found an additional 111 people who were buried there. At this time, there are 250 known burials at Mount Pleasant, ranging from 1891 to 1966. And that number is sure to rise as my research continues. Now, the original burying ground in Norbeck was first described in an 1869 unrecorded plat subdividing the property owned by Adrian Wadsworth. And then in 1883, Wadsworth sold a half acre for use as a burying ground to two men who were named as, quote, trustees for the benefit of the colored people, end quote. The Mount Pleasant Church has used the cemetery as its own for over 70 years. However, there's no deed for the property except for the one drawn up in 1883. So one of the reasons for my research is to make a case for a deed being drawn up giving church ownership of the cemetery through adverse possession. Mount Pleasant Methodist Church in Norbeck merged with another church in 1989 and became Jerusalem Mount Pleasant United Methodist Church, located in Rockville, and the old church building in Norbeck was sold to Waves of Glory Church. Now, Mount Pleasant Cemetery actually occupies two adjacent lots in Norbeck, and one is the original burying ground I just described, and the other is owned by Waves of Glory Church. And I have some concerns about whether Waves of Glory Church is even aware that they own a half a cemetery, or if they know about the county laws regarding the cemetery. So that was a question I was going to pose to Brian and the HPO about any contact they've had with Waves of Glory Church. And that's all I have to say, and I'll take questions.
Thank you. Are there any questions or comments from the board for anyone?
Actually,
Sorry.
We haven't directly contacted the church. When we contacted property owners about burial sites, we've contacted the property, the owner of record in ESTAT. And in this instance, it appears that ESTAT information was incorrect. And we have been working on working with the state to correct those data. So if we establish that, in fact, the church is the owner, then yes, we would certainly contact them. And we can reach out to them even independently of that and say, there is a cemetery adjacent to your property. There's some question about whether you actually may own this land. If you do, then there are these responsibilities. We can do that, but in this case, and in other cases around the county, ownership is ambiguous sometimes.
Can I've looked at MC Atlas and I've gone to the site, and it does appear that there are burials that are on the Waves of Glory tract. And also I went and checked with an obituary for one of the visible markers in that area, and it stated that that person was buried at Mount Pleasant. So I believe it is. Well, we can talk about this.
Yeah, I appreciate the additional information. Mm-hmm. And also I would just note that given the number of graves that your research has identified, does raise the question about whether the parcel defined in ESTAT actually whether the graves are actually confined to that parcel or not. They may well extend beyond it with a particularly large number of graves. That's a common issue.
Yeah, I think that's one of the things I was trying to do with the sheer number of burials. It has to be larger than that half acre.
Are there other questions or comments?
Actually, yes. Dr. Crane, I wanted to go back to Ms. McGuckian's comment regarding she referred to it as GPR. For those who don't know what that acronym is, it's the ground penetrating radar. We've talked about this before, and I wanted to get an update from you regarding And you mentioned in your presentation the use, the need of GPR.
Yes, it did come up last year, and what I said last year I still hold. Ground penetrating radar is very useful in identifying historic graves. However, reading the signals requires a great deal of training and experience in order to do it well, particularly on historic grave sites where the signals can be subtle and ambiguous. So what I would suggest is that our money is best spent on hiring contractors who have the appropriate equipment and the expertise to use it. We did actually apply for a Maryland Historical Trust non-capital grant last summer to combine the use of human remains detection dogs and ground penetrating radar and limited archaeological investigation on 3 approximate sites in order to essentially test that method, that combination of techniques to define the cemetery boundaries. Unfortunately, I mean, a lot of people thought this was a good proposal. Unfortunately, however, it was not funded. But we still have that proposal sort of ready to go, as it were. And so as funding from other sources becomes available, we do have a budget prepared to conduct such investigations and preliminary work done with property owners and land managers to allow access on certain of our approximate sites. So we can do that work. We need the funding to do it.
Okay. The other thing I wanted to mention, and again, this is in response to Ms. McGuckian's comment as it relates to you and your team's work. You didn't mention it, and I'd ask that you would mention it. I know personally that you were part of a presentation on the 14th of May, and I'll stop there and let you talk about it.
I did mention it briefly, but so I worked with Jean Tangara from the Montgomery County Remembrance and Reconciliation Commission. That commission is focused specifically on remembering the 3 known victims of lynching in Montgomery County and working towards remembrance, reconciliation, and healing around racial violence in Montgomery County and elsewhere. And so we worked together to prepare a half-day virtual symposium for community members to learn how to research and find resources to support the research and preservation of African American historic sites. There were 3 separate panels. I participated in the second of the 3 that was focused specifically on cemetery sites. And I was joined in that with colleagues from Prince George's County, essentially my counterpart with Prince George's Planning, Jennifer Stabler, and Stacy Polis, who works with, who's an archaeologist for Anne Arundel County and works on cemetery sites. So together, the 3 of us were, able to speak to regional efforts to identify and to map and to preserve cemetery sites. So I think the program as a whole I thought was very interesting, and there were a large number of participants, and I'm glad to have had the opportunity to speak to that.
Okay. If there are no other comments and questions, we can thank Brian for that presentation, and we'll. That we accept these modifications? Yeah, could we get a motion to accept the proposed modifications?
So moved.
A second.
All in favor?
Aye. Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? That is approved. And we'll be back in a minute for the Silver Spring Downtown and Adjacent Communities Planned resolution of adoption. Hang on, we're waiting for Jerry. Well, you know, it's not regulatory, so you can go ahead and begin the presentation. He'll catch up.
All right. Good morning, Planning Board. My name is Ben Berbert with the Countywide Planning and Policy Team. And before you today, I have comments and a recommendation for ZTA 2203, overlay zones for downtown Silver Spring, which is implementing the Silver Spring Downtown and Adjacent Communities Sector Plan, which was just adopted. Staff is recommending the board transmit a revised version of ZTA 2203 that's reflective of the final version of the Silver Spring plan that was approved by the council. The revised ZTA should include a couple of additional changes that we're going to present today in addition to those that were shown in your packet. As a little bit of background, on April 11th of 2022, the Planning Board transmitted a draft ZTA for introduction by the council based on the Planning Board draft of the Silver Spring Downtown and Adjacent Communities Plan. On May 26th of 2022, Council took its final vote to adopt a modified version of that plan. And so today, staff is proposing modifications to ZTA 2203 to make it consistent with some of the changes that were implemented by the Council's changes. And just as a reminder, there is a public hearing on this on June 14th of 2022. So some of the changes that are proposed to the ZTA, the first three bullets that are kind of shown in black text are ones that we've already made and that are in your packet. Anything that you find in here that's in red text is stuff that we're adding in addition that was not in your packet today. The first major change is removing the height incentive area, both any code reference or discussion on how that would work, as well as the placeholder for the map from the downtown Silver Spring overlay zone. There are now separate prices for either residential and non-residential square footage for downtown Silver Spring density payments. And we are no longer going to exclude structured parking from being eligible for public benefits within downtown Silver Spring. A couple of additional changes that have come up due to some correspondence we've received and realizing we probably do need to deal with this. The MPDU section of the downtown Silver Spring overlay zone is having a few extra words added to discuss that you can indeed get additional building height for providing those MPDUs. And we are offering a slight clarification on how and when the park contribution funds will be calculated for projects that are having to provide open space and are then contributing to this fund instead. Again, the rationale for this ZTA, it does three main things. It removes the Ripley South Silver Spring overlay zone. It modifies the Fenton Village overlay zone substantially, and it establishes a new downtown Silver Spring overlay zone consistent with the Silver Spring plan. On the map here, it just sort of shows roughly where these overlay zones are. The area outlined in purple is the proposed new downtown Silver Spring overlay zone. The area that's sort of in the bluish shading on the right-hand half of that overlay area is the existing Fenton Village overlay zone with its modifications. And then the areas shown in green on the screen are the areas that are currently in the Ripley South Silver Spring overlay zone that would be removed. Regarding the Ripley South Silver Spring overlay zone, this was created in 2000 during the Silver Spring Central Business District sector plan to help incentivize revitalization in the district. There has been a lot of development that has occurred in that district. And so in large part, the overlay zone is no longer needed, and some of the elements that were still useful in that overlay zone are being incorporated into the downtown Silver Spring overlay zone. Again, some of the changes from the Fenton Village overlay zone, very slight adjustment to the boundary just to encompass all of the non-residentially zoned properties in the area. Some updates to the land use section of the code, because, again, either the CR zone, as it's been implemented, takes care of some of these recommendations, or the new overlay zone for downtown Silver Spring would take care of them. We're removing the provision for transferring of open spaces, and there are some new requirements that we're looking for retail bays to help get some small retail establishments in place. That was a recommendation out of the Retail and Diverse Communities Study. The downtown Silver Spring overlay zone is the new one we are adding, and it is the largest change as part of this ZTA. There are 4 sections as part of that. Really, there's only 3 now that the height incentive map is no longer part of this. It is just the purpose, land use, and development standards sections. Purpose of the overlay zone, the main thing that's changing here is we are removing building height from what was introduced, in part because building height's now not a function of this overlay zone anymore. Again, the land uses that are in the overlay zone, the biggest changes, and these are things that you saw earlier, to look at light manufacturing to allow food service facilities defined by Chapter 15, particularly trying to get commercial kitchens, as well as to clarify that urban farming can be located on rooftops as a permitted use in this overlay zone. Some of the development standards, we are still keeping the building height section. Again, the height incentive area was the big part of that is no longer the case. Now the only reference that remains for that is just that there are a few select properties identified in the plan that can exceed the 300 feet mapped height. And then again, first clarification regarding MPDUs also shows up in this section. The current text says that the only thing that can allow buildings to exceed 300 feet is the provision, pointing you back to that actual sector plan. We also have then pointed to the subsection that talks about the MPDUs, so that we can have clarity that MPDUs are also allowed to exceed that mapped building height if they follow the formula. Looking at the density, again, this is remaining unchanged. The properties of FAR 8 are not subject to the 7.5C or 7.5R caps. Properties may exceed the mapped FAR with acquisition of the downtown Silver Spring density. The main change regarding the downtown Silver Spring density is that originally we were proposing a flat $5 per square foot fund for all density. The council ultimately decided that $5 per square foot should remain for residential, but that it should be $3 per square foot for non-residential density. Again, the standards for moderately priced dwelling units, everywhere within the overlay zone is required to do 15% MPDUs as a minimum instead of 12.5%. We are adding a new provision to that, again, to help get to the idea that you can increase the mapped height with MPDUs, using language from the Bethesda overlay zone, clarifying that projects over 15% MPDUs can follow a formula to receive up to 12 feet per floor of additional building height. For public benefit points, again, the original proposal was that transit proximity and structured parking should not be able to count for public benefit points. We are now only going to prohibit transit proximity from the public benefit points. The other thing just noting here is that the design advisory panel, the text that describes the makeup of that panel, used to be located in the height incentive area section. Since that's been removed, it's now just been relocated to the public benefit points section. The final major change here for the public open space, again, anybody, unless there's a master plan recommendation for open space on your site, should be providing money to the Parks Fund to implement improvements to existing open space and parks. Question was raised about how is it determined when and who and how that would work. And so we are offering that it should be determined by the planning board at the time of site plan review what the appropriate cost is for a pro rata of park improvement. So in conclusion, staff is recommending the board does transmit the revised version of the ZTA that is in your packet with a couple of additional changes I've mentioned today. And that concludes my presentation.
We have a couple of people who are signed up to speak. Looks like, or at least one actually, Liz Rogers. Ms. Rogers, are you there?
I am. Good morning, Chairman Anderson and members of the board. For the record, Elizabeth Rogers with Lurch, Early & Brewer. Our firm represents Arlington Partnership for Affordable Housing, who's the contract purchaser of the property located at 900 Spring Street in Silver Spring, and they're excited to expand their presence within the county and particularly about this site. We've closely followed the master plan process for downtown Silver Spring and are supportive of the planning board's recommendations and the district council's ultimate decisions as it relates to the property. We just have one comment that we'd like to offer on the zoning text amendment before you today for the downtown Silver Spring overlay zone. We submitted written testimony into the record yesterday, so I will be brief with my remarks. Our one comment relates to a provision that does not appear to be included within the zoning text amendment. We would suggest that the zoning text amendment specifically and clearly exempt projects that provide 25% or more in PDUs from making any payment toward the Civic Improvement Fund for residential density that's needed to achieve the mapped heights in the property. This is similar to what's included within the Bethesda overlay zone, where there's an exemption from making contributions to the park impact payment in order to encourage additional affordable housing within Bethesda. And we think Silver Spring should have the same incentives. So we would just respectfully request that the planning board can consider including a similar provision in the downtown Silver Spring overlay zone that would provide for that exemption. We appreciate your consideration of our comments.
Thank you. Does staff have a view on that suggestion? Not to put you on the spot.
I mean, I would defer to leadership.
Yeah,
I can weigh in.
Yeah, I think that Atara has put a little on the spot. Do you want to?
Sure. I don't know that we have a major problem with that. It is consistent with what we did to, energize the idea of affordable housing in Bethesda for that overlay zone. So, that would be consistent, as Ms. Rogers has stated. So, I mean, we do see that we're going to get a mix, or hopefully get a mix of use types in Silver Spring. So, not necessarily all residential, but I don't think we have a major issue with that.
Any other comments or questions?
I was going to say I'm okay with incorporating that in our comments if everyone else on the board is.
Yeah, Jerry says, I think that's consistent with what we're trying to do in accommodating affordability and people that need the type of housing. So I think that's a good move. I do have one question. In the past on Silver Spring, we heard comments about WSSC, their sewerage and water supply to the different zones and Silver Spring. Is that still somewhat impeding interest in development?
I think the short answer is yes. There's not a lot we can do about it. I've heard that the council has indicated some willingness to look at funding some of those improvements, but that would be out of county resources. Okay. And it seems like really this is something WSCC should be encouraged to address, but
great.
It's not
Thank
really
you, Casey. Appreciate it.
Yeah.
All right. Thank you.
Carol, did you want to say something?
If I could, if I could on the MPDU on the 25% exemption, I'm in favor of it. I just think that we should raise it as part of our comment to the council that it wasn't included in the plan, and that wasn't the direction we got. But but we do recommend it, and we would ask that they approve it. I just want to be clear that it's probably something that should have been in the discussion of the plan for this ZTA. But I do think that it's a great policy to continue parallel to what is done in Bethesda.
Okay.
It's just the way that.
Yeah. Okay. Very good. Any other comments or questions? If not, could we get a motion to approve the draft as prepared by staff with the comments that we've just discussed?
So moved.
Jerry says she's second.
All in favor?
Aye.
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 Opposed? That is approved. And we can now turn to the resolution of adoption, which I think has to be on a separate Teams call for some reason. Okay, we are back to talk some more about Silver Spring and the resolution of adoption. And before that we do that, I wanted to say, for the record, that we really appreciate all the work of our staff, and particularly Atara Margolis, who jumped into this thing as, I think, pretty much her first project on coming to work here, and it was really challenging for a whole lot of reasons, and just wanted to make sure that we thank her and the others who worked on this plan publicly. Thank you. Hooray. The floor is yours.
Thank you. For the record, Atara Margulies from the Down County Planning Division. And we are here to to recommend that the board approve the resolution of adoption that was on the, put forth on the web, and then we have here, if we want to review it, for a transmission to the commission. On May 26th, last week, the county council, sitting as a district council, approved the Silver Spring Downtown and Adjacent Communities Plan, and we're here to ask we pass that on to the commission for full adoption.
If there are no other comments or questions, can we get a motion on adoption of the resolution of adoption?
So moved.
Jerry Sishy, second.
All in favor?
Aye.
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 Opposed? That's approved. And how about that? You can now build 360-foot buildings in Montgomery County. Very good. Thanks so much. We're going to go to item 10, which is about adopting the resolution creating the Potomac Overlook Historic District. Okay, we are back to talk about the Potomac Overlook Historic District with John Lieberts. Or Rebecca Ballo.
Good morning, Chair Anderson. Good morning, Chair Anderson and members of the board. John is out, so I will be handling this item virtually. So we are asking the board this morning to approve the resolution of adoption of the Potomac Overlook amendment for transmission to the full council. So again, attached for your review and approval is resolution number 22-047 to adopt the Potomac Overlook Historic District and an amendment to the master plan for historic preservation. And I'm here to answer any questions.
We appreciate your work on bringing this through the process, and I'm sure the community does too. Learned a lot of interesting things, as we often do in these types of projects. If there are no other questions or comments, perhaps we could get a motion to approve this resolution.
I'll make a motion, also recognizing Rebecca's beautiful top.
Very purple.
Yeah.
Is there a second on
I'll
the?
second.
Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
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 Opposed? That is approved. Thank you. And
Thank you.
yeah, before we go off the record for this, I just want to clarify where we are for this next item. I'm not sure that the hearing examiner approved the request for a continuance by the applicant because the applicant's lawyer apparently was injured. So we are in a position to defer this or continue it, which I was inclined to do, but I wanted to make sure that if somebody had shown up to speak today that we could let them do that because we don't want to inconvenience people. So could I just clarify, are there people who
Yes,
want to speak?
we have
now?
a number of people who are here today and who would like to speak. And so what we would recommend is that at 12 noon you take a break now, have an early lunch. At 12 noon, come in, hear the staff report, hear the testimony, and then continue the item to a date that we will arrange with the applicant and the applicant's attorney to finish your consideration.
Okay, that's fine. I know we said noon, but do we really have to wait until noon, or could we start people up?
Well, I think we have actually sent a number of the people who were here, told them they could leave and come back at noon.
Oh, okay. So let's be back here like at 1:45. Even if you bring your food with you, that way we can get going as soon as we get the other folks assembled. How's
Sure, and we'll have staff ready to start.
that? Great, thanks. So we'll see you all shortly. All right, we are ready for item 6, which is a conditional use case for 12120 Price Distillery Road. And as I'd explained at the end of the last item, we'd received a request to defer or continue this item from the applicant's lawyer, who apparently had a pretty significant injury last night. Normally, we would not defer an item because we don't want to inconvenience anyone on either side who's already planned to come and speak. But under the circumstances, we felt that we could accommodate that because it's really not our item to decide. It's the hearing examiner. We just take recommendations on it. And because the people who are already signed up to speak, who are either online and signed up or are here present physically, they can go ahead and have their say, and then we can continue this item next week. So everybody can say their piece, and hopefully no one will be inconvenienced. That's our objective, or at least to try to come as close to that ideal as possible. So with that, we are going to hear the staff presentation. We will hear from anybody who's here to speak, from members of the public, pro or con, and then next week we will continue the case where we'll have a presentation from the applicant, presumably, and the board will dispose of the recommendations as it sees fit. So with that, it's time to hear from Josh Penn.
Good morning. I believe it's still morning. Josh Penn, Up County Planning Division. Today I have with me Mark Beal, our new zoning planner, and Patrick Butler, Chief of Up County. Today we have 12120 Prices Distillery Road, which is a conditional use application numbered CU 2022-07 and Forest Conservation Plan Amendment SC 2022-014. You'll notice different numbers in the staff report for the Forest Conservation Plan, and on the plans, there was a nomenclature error that didn't really agree with our E-plan system, so we had to assign it a new number at the last minute. So the correct number for the application for forest conservation is SC 2022-014, and the system did accept it, so we're glad to hear that. Today we have two items in front of you, the conditional use and the forest conservation plan. Staff is recommending denial of the conditional use to operate a landscape contractor business. We are basing this denial on three major findings. One is 59731EC, which requires a substantial conformance with the master plan. We believe that the application is not in substantial conformance with the 1996 Rustic Roads Functional Master Plan. We are also findings under 59731E1F that it will be served by adequate public facilities. Staff believes that sanitary sewer and public roads are not met for this application, and therefore we are recommending denial on that. And the third finding we're making is under 59731EG that it will not cause undue harm to the neighborhood as a result of a non-inherent adverse effect. We do believe that the not being able to provide sanitary sewer service for the site is a non-inherent adverse effect that would have impacts on the community and the welfare of the employees. For the forest conservation plan, staff does recommend approval or conditional approval of the final forest conservation plan amendment SC 2022-014 with conditions as stated in the staff report. Everything in there meets chapter 22A. The project location is located at 12120 Prices Distillery Road. We are north of Clarksburg and west of Damascus. You can see it here. It's kind of northeast of Little Bennett Regional Park. The neighborhood is basically an area around the site about 5,000 feet in diameter reaching out. The surrounding area is predominantly unimproved farmland, parkland, Little Bennett Regional Park, and wooded parcels with single-family residential dwellings. There is one approved special exception in the area, which is S2310, which was approved in 1998 for a landscape contractor and wholesale nursery, Wheaton Tree Service, which is located up here. The property in total is 32.69 acres and is a single unplatted parcel. The land is currently improved with two barn structures, a larger 7,200 square foot structure, which is towards the Prices Distillery side, and a historic barn structure to the rear, which is the smaller structure here. Access is provided to the site via Prices Distillery Road via an approximately 1,200 foot long gravel driveway. The proposed conditional use area is much smaller than the overall property. They're asking for a conditional use only on 3.84 acres of the overall 32-acre property. The applicant is seeking conditional use approval to validate the existing current use on the property, which is a landscape contractor. Operations will occur throughout the year, including pruning, tree removal, mulching, consulting, replacement, cabling, bracing, lighting, protection, and ornamental plantings. This is not your standard landscape contractor where they're doing mowing and yard maintenance. They are a tree care service. Staff does include up to 25 on-site employees. It breaks down to 4 owner managers and 21 field crew members. This is a blow-up of the proposed conditional use area. Once you get past the driveway area, they are having both operations mostly in the morning and the afternoon, peak activity when they're going to be arriving to gather equipment to leave to go out into the field, and when they return to the site to return the equipment and put stuff away for the day. They have 15 vehicles currently. They're asking for a total of 18 vehicles in the future. Right now they have 12 stake body dump truck type box, which are under 26,000 pounds, and 3 larger trucks, which are over 26,000 pounds in weight. They also have 3 flatbed or box trailers, 7 chippers, and a bobcat on site. Here's a blow-up or the aerial of the conditional use area. You can see the large barn, which is on the Price's Distillery roadside, the historic barn, which is also known as the John M. King barn on the locational atlas. You can see where the gravel the gravel parking lot is here for employees and equipment. You see the gravel millings going up from the driveway all through this area. You have a full fuel storage area, and there is a chemical toilet currently on site you can see here in the photograph. This is in the 1985 Damascus Plan area. You can see here with the red star. There is no site-specific recommendations or recommendations for conditional uses in the area. However, it does substantially conform with the overall recommendations of the 1985 Damascus Master Plan. We also have the 1996 Rustic Roads Functional Master Plan, which does designate Price's Distillery Road as a rustic road. In the staff report, you'll see that we stated that without a recommendation from the RIAC, which is the Rustic Roads Advisory Committee on the application, we didn't think we could find a substantial conformance with master plan. Since the staff report was posted on May 31st, we did receive an official recommendation from Rustic Roads, which was forwarded on to MCP chair, so it should be in the record in your packets. They did recommend denial of the application from the Rustic Roads. I'll discuss that more in the next slide. But staff does believe there still cannot find substantial conformance with the Rustic Roads master plan. The Rustic Roads Advisory Committee, as I said, on May 31st, they issued a letter stating their official vote on the project. They say, we strongly and unanimously oppose the Chapingo LLC application for the conditional use. For a full write-up, you can read their letter, but in summary, they were concerned about impacts to the significant features of the Rustic Road, changes to the driveway apron, impacts on the John M. King barn, and the weight-limited bridge on Burnt Hill Road, which we'll also discuss later in terms of road impacts. The view of the barn is listed as a significant feature, and it's already been negatively impacted by a portable toilet and facilities and piles of millings visible from the road. That's directly from the Rustic Roads letter. The application states that the operation does not require any sanitary facilities for the workers, but as you notice in the aerial of the site, they already have a chemical toilet on site. And then the last kind of comment, this comes directly from the Rustic Roads letter, was there's a negative pattern of behavior of the applicant and impacts on Rustic Roads and non-compliance with the county code. So I just, for the record, like I said, it was sent to the NCP chair and should be in your packet. So now we get into kind of the meat of this discussion, which is the adequate public facilities or sanitary sewer. Sanitary sewer is a basic public facility to ensure that safe sanitation is provided, and this comes under section 59731E1F. And staff believes that sanitary sewer is required, and you have to provide adequate public facilities on site for your employees. The applicant's position is that there is no sanitary service is needing, and the finding that it is adequate can be made because they are a mobile workforce and not expected to be on site all day long, and they have no offices on site. Staff does not agree with this interpretation, but you'll see in the attachments that the applicant has provided a lot of documentation from other regions of the county in terms of OSHA standards on mobile workforces and other things. And while staff does agree that if this was a permitted by use right, that this might not be applicable, but under the conditional use findings under F, we have to make a finding that there's adequate public sanitary sewer available for the site. In this case, it would be septic, not sewer, but we do believe that it's an adequate public facility findings under the general conditional use findings, and that's why we're concerned about it here in this case. Staff did go through all kinds of different alternative methods of sanitary facilities, including porta potties, composting toilets, and other, maybe bringing in holding tanks, and we could not find any legal long-term solution other than providing a septic system that would be accepted by Montgomery County for permitting. So we do believe that there is a concern for health, safety, and welfare of visitors and employees, in addition to near neighbors and the residents of surrounding properties, if there are no facilities provided on site. The applicant's position was considered carefully in the analysis. However, at the end of the day, staff just could not come to the conclusion that public facilities or on-site bathrooms were not required for this use. Secondly, we have the adequate public facilities of public roads. The Price's Distillery Road is a rustic road, which the site is located on, and also you cannot access the site without going on other rustic roads. So this site is contained by rustic roads, including Burnt Hill Road, which has a weight-limited bridge of 30,000 pounds. They have several trucks that are over 30,000 pounds, and then when you tie in under 26,000 pound vehicle with a bobcat in tow on a trailer, or a trailer towing other and equipment and people, we do have a concern that the weight-limited bridges would be impacted. So we find that with those concerns, we don't think adequate public facilities for an additional commercial use on these rustic roads is adequate. And then we get into 59731EG, which looks at the inherent characteristics and non-inherent adverse effects of a conditional use. So we looked through them and we found a bunch of inherent uses, and we do agree to that there are some inherent uses, but we do believe that the biggest non-inherent adverse effect would be the lack of on-site facilities. They have no ability to provide sanitary facilities on site. They have no way of doing alternate method of compliance. And so we think that this is not inherent to the use, but inherent to this location. So therefore, it's not inherent to the use, but it's part of this location, where this might not be an issue if this particular use was at a different property in the ag reserve zone that could provide on-site sanitary service. Moving on, we have section of the code 629C, which talks about landscaping, and there's a bit of discussion between staff and the applicant in terms of what the adequate parking area should be, and determining what the landscaping would be. Staff did look at it. Staff felt that the parking area, since it was not delineated particularly between where employees would park and where equipment would be parked, we had to count the entire area, where in other cases, if they delineate specifically employees can only park here, the landscaping requirements only apply to employee parking and not to equipment parking. So that's why staff went with the larger area of the 8,900 square feet area. And staff does not believe it meets the code for this use, and so the applicant is seeking alternative compliance. Staff does not agree with the alternative compliance in this case, but the final determination on alternative compliance for landscaping would fall on the hearing examiner as part of that hearing. Let's see. Tree canopy coverage does meet it. Tree canopy does not meet the code if the parking area is expanded. So once again, if we redefine the parking area, their calculations do not work. So that's why we were saying this does not meet it, because we believe the parking area is different than what the applicant proposed, and that issue was not resolved. Screening requirements, applicants provided 6-foot privacy fence along the west property line. No landscaping is provided. Applicant has also requested alternative compliance under section 6.81. Staff believes this does not meet the requirements of an alternative method and does not recommend approval of this landscaping plan as shown. But once again, alternative compliance is finally determined by the hearing examiner. The lighting plan is sufficient. There were no new lighting fixtures, so there wasn't a true photometric required, but they did provide a photometric of all the existing fixtures on the site, and it does meet all lighting regulations. Transportation. The application is exempt from the 2022 LATR because it does not exceed 50 peak hour trips. And this is where we get a little bit of confusion, and if we want to get into it further, we can discuss it. But the traffic was done at 22 employees on site at any time, and the applicant is asking for 25 overall. Staff does believe we could probably work around that with selective hours of keeping the employees limited to 22 or less during peak hours. So if we wanted to get further into that, we could. The roadway is classified as rustic, and they're exempt from installing sidewalks or master plan bikeways. There are no master plan bikeways recommended in the improvements along Price Distillery Road, and no additional bicycle infrastructure is required. We did look at site distance. The site distance evaluation form was submitted and signed by an engineer as good. They did have quite exceptional site distance, almost double what was required. However, staff did not receive a copy of the approved version of that form from DPS. We received the engineer stamped copy. So moving forward to the hearing examiner, I would say that we would need the stamped approved site distance copy. Transportation staff did have a significant concern, specifically on Burnt Hill Road and this weight-limited bridge here. As you'll see in community correspondence we'll touch on later, the community has noticed trucks with the Chapingo logo crossing this bridge regularly. So I will leave that to community concern. I don't want to get into that as part of me because I did not witness it personally, but I will address it there. And staff for transportation did echo that concern that there could be an impact on these weight-limited bridges. As noted earlier, it does have a forest conservation plan amendment. It is going, I have the wrong number in here, I apologize. Like I said, we changed it at the last minute. Please ignore the S2009 number. The original plan was S2009-002, which under normal nomenclature would get an A after it for an amendment, but that does not work in E-plan, so that's why we had to give it a new sediment control number, which I stated at the beginning. It does increase the amount that's non-agriculturally exempt for the overall forest conservation plan. The original forest conservation plan was for the entire 300-acre farm, and this was just one piece of that larger farm. So we had to go back and kind of reconstruct the original forest conservation plan to show what the increase in the net tract area would be. And when we did that, the net tract area increased by 3.84 acres, which is the commercial area of the landscape of the conditional use area, which did increase their planting requirement to 0.77 acres. The applicant was proposing to meet those at 2-to-1 ratio on the parent tract, since it's not within the net tract for forest conservation. It's considered off-site, so their requirement would be a 1.54 acre requirement. The applicant on the plan is showing 2.15 acres of planting within the environmentally sensitive features within the parent tract. So it does meet all forest conservation and environmental guidelines for the project. So we are good there. Community concerns. Now, I went through point by point in the staff report, but I just wanted to highlight them here. Staff did look at all these things, and we addressed them point by point what we could in the staff report. But the concerns from the community were past practices of Chapingo Tree Service. Basically, they had another site prior to this one, which had issues. Past history of the applicant dumping at this site, they had a violation for tree stump dumping on the property. The connection of the widened drive with Price's Distillery Road and the expanding of the driveway moving back, and they believe that they did not, as required, go to the Rustic Roads Advisory Committee prior to expanding that driveway. Like I said, these are the community concerns. In the staff report, you'll see the specific staff responses. It's a little bit long, and I didn't want to cover everything in detail here, but I can answer any questions. Another concern was commercialization of the agricultural reserve, increased local traffic on rustic roads, equipment and noise disturbances, spread of tree disease from tree material being brought from off-site, large company trucks driving on Price's Distillery Road and Burnt Hill Road. The weight restricted bridge was of extreme concern for most of the parties that rode in. There was a comment in there also that the company employees have loud after-hours party at the site late into the evenings, disrupting normally quiet neighborhood. Staff did not find any noise complaints on site, but that just means we could not confirm either way that this statement is true or not. There was a fuel shed located on the property. They believed that if there was a spill from these fuel sheds, that it could leak directly into Little Bennett Creek, causing downstream damage. And since there was no well and septic on site, cleaning up any spill would be difficult. They also said that if salt chemicals were stored, because originally the application included snow removal, that has been removed from the application, so that I don't believe that salt would be stored on site anymore. So I think this kind of took care of itself. Moving on. With many employees, no property, and the property has no well or septic facilities, so they're basically saying that they don't believe that the employees would get in a car and drive 10 or 15 minutes away to use the facilities. And then negative impact on property values. Once again, these negative impact property values is kind of something that we can't really determine because we are not real estate agents. I kind of highlighted all these things and went point by point in the staff report for you. On the opposite side, we have community support letters. Staff did receive 6 letters of support from 4 unique parties. 2 of them were from this, we had repeats from 2 parties. So we had 6 letters total, but only 4 parties. 3 were actually within the initial application, which staff should have included in the staff report. However, we did not see them because they were on pages 100 and 102 of the 120-page PDF that we received, and they were actually on Chapingo letterhead, so we didn't think they were community correspondence. We thought they were initially correspondence from the company. But they were there, and so staff does admit that they should have been included, but there were 3 prior to the staff report that were received, and so that's that. And then we have 3 were received via email after the posting of the report. Once again, one of those was on Chapingo letterhead. It's their basic comments were it's a beneficial land use for the area, and there was no concern or traffic for the noise. So those were the community support letters in summary. Like I said, you have most of those in your packet, and we do have some that came in afterwards, which were forwarded to MCP chair, so they should be in your packet. Staff does think that under 59731 EC, that it's not in substantial conformance with the Rustic Roads Functional Master Plan, and we cannot make the finding. Under 59731 E1F, adequate public facilities finding, staff does not believe the finding can be made. Sanitary, sewer, and public roads, as we mentioned earlier in the presentation and in the report, staff finds this cannot be satisfied. And then finally, we have 59731 EG, which the proposed use will not cause undue harm to the neighborhood as a result of a non-inherent adverse effect. Staff, as stated in the staff report, does believe that the lack of on-site facilities is a non-inherent adverse effect and could have issues with the health, safety, and welfare of visitors, employees, and neighborhoods and neighbors. So with that being said, staff is making the recommendation of denial of the conditional use CU 2022-07 to operate a landscape contractor business based upon these 3 findings that I just mentioned. And staff is making the recommendation on the Forest Conservation Plan amendment be approved if we move forward because it meets all the concerns under Chapter 22A and the forest and the environmental guidelines. That's the end of staff's presentation. I am here for any questions if you'd like.
We do have a couple of folks signed up to speak. Thomas Harbach, or is it Hartsock? My eyesight is failing me, and my hopefully not too terribly advanced age, and Laura Van Etten. Yes, please.
I have not done this before, so thank you for having me.
And then just bring it closer to you.
Okay, is that good? All right. Oh, push it again? No, it's on. Yeah, so I'm Laura Van Etten. I'm the current chair of the Rustic Roads Advisory Committee. And I just thought I'd do a very brief intro to Rustic Roads here. We're a very small committee, 7 people. That's 7 voting members. We actually have 3 members who used to be on the committee who helped us out a lot. One of them, Leslie Seville here, whom you know, was our appointee from planning for many years, and I'm sure if you have questions, she could answer better than I. But under statute, we advise you guys, the county council, and the executive, and so a lot of that sort of trickles down. We advise you, usually it goes to the planning department staff and then gets up the chain to you. With the exec, it's usually DOT and DPS that we end up advising. And in this case, we just felt it was necessary for two reasons. One, to go straight to you because we didn't have time based on the applicant not providing documentation in a timely fashion across the board for every meeting. And we ran out of time to get our input to staff. So that's why we did a last-minute letter to you all. And also, we just felt really strongly about this. Under our activities, we always look at driveways because that's kind of where the private property meets the edge of the rustic road. And then we also look at things called significant features, which you'll see when you work on the functional master plan. Those are sort of special attributes of the road that get called out for most roads. And once you approve that master plan, it goes to the council, and those are codified. Those are protected by county code. So significant features must be preserved when there are improvements on the road. And in this case, we had two significant features. There weren't any trees or hedgerows to worry about, but there were views of the farm and views of the barn. And then again, we had the driveway. So I'm just going to real quick go over three issues that some of which were touched on by Mr. Penn, but really I just want the commissioners to understand how difficult it was for us dealing with this applicant. I mean, everything they did, it just turned for the worse. As you heard, they had dumped wood debris in view of the Rustic Road. Well, when they came to the meeting after that had happened, I asked them about it, and they said they cleaned it up. Well, it turned out I drove over there a few days later. I'm like, great, they cleaned it up. I think they're going to be doing the right thing here. Now, we didn't find out for a couple months that they actually dumped it on the back of the property, which, okay, they're clever enough to have taken it out of the view shed so that we couldn't complain about it, but that's breaking state law. You know, you have to have an environmental permit from the state to dump wood debris on your property. And we know, because we talked about this with them at the earlier meetings, they know exactly where the 6 state permitted sites are that they can take wood debris. So they just ignored that. But that was a problem. Obviously, we didn't determine that until later. The second thing that happened was pretty bad was the driveway. In their application, it's still in their written application, they say the 12-foot wide gravel driveway is sufficient for our needs. I'm not going to touch that. Well, we all know, and they did mention, if Fire and Rescue required them to change driveway, they would have to. And we know that. We work with DPS and Fire and Rescue all the time. And the process is they go get their permit for changing the driveway. They submit a drawing of the current driveway and what does Fire and Rescue want them to do. We meet at the roadside, and we kind of go over it. In this case, without our knowledge or anyone's knowledge, they widened their driveway. And we learned of it from the neighbors. I went over and looked. It was now, instead of 12 feet wide, it's 20, 27, 31 feet wide in some places. It actually went on 2 sides of a utility pole. They brought it to the road, and they put an apron where it meets the road. Those are those wings where you turn in for easy turning access, 65 feet wide, never, ever required by DPS for commercial use. And then they paved it all with millings. It looks absolutely awful. You know, it really looks bad. And when we asked them about it, cleverly they said, they didn't say we were told to do this by Fire and Rescue. They said, well, we told you that if Fire and Rescue required us to do it, we would have to do it. And so we're at a 6 o'clock Rustic Roads meeting on a Thursday night. We can't exactly call Marie Labat and say, did you require them to do it? But the next day, our staff coordinator calls over to DPS, or well, actually she emailed, and we got confirmation that no, they weren't required to widen the road. They got their own drawing of the widened driveway and took it to her as existing in hopes she'd just approve it that way. And the funny thing about this is, the ironic thing is, a couple of days ago, we got an email from their lawyer saying, oh, look, Fire and Rescue has said we're going to look at this again, and they're requiring the company to cut back the apron of the road from 65 to 35 feet, which is much more appropriate, get the utility pole out of the middle of the driveway and make it only 20 feet wide everywhere. But here's the clever thing again. When we get the lawyer's email, here's what he says. Please see the attached item, Fire Marshal approving revised fire access plan. This will enable my client to reduce the width of the driveway. Enable. It doesn't say they're going to do it. it will enable them. I mean, again, these people act in such bad faith that I wouldn't expect them to cooperate with that. Now, maybe they will have to get their permit. If they don't, or if they get their conditional use, if they don't, I have no idea what they're going to do. I don't trust them. And the last thing I just mentioned, this is just sort of an example of this sort of deceit we were dealing with these guys. The applicant repeatedly told us that that 1800s historic barn would not be used in the CU. When you saw the drawing that Mr. Penn put up, it showed it's excluded from the actual acreage that's reserved for the CU. Every meeting they told us they wouldn't be using that. Well, again, we had trouble getting their documents from them, and I'll just touch on that for a minute. In order to get documents from these people, you had to log into their outside counsel's law firm document portal. And who does that? Don't we usually just go to planning's website? But we log in this portal, put in your name, your email, your phone number, whatever, and you could get in there and get these zip files. So I know what happened to me was, I'd open zip files, put the files in my hard drive, read them, whatever, and then if you hit the back button accidentally or instead of some X, or maybe just time out, you get kicked out. I must have logged in 8 times in one day just to get their documents that I should have been able to get right on the planning department's website. So we knew there were missing documents. We knew one in particular was missing, and we kept asking. Our last meeting, we pretty much demanded of them. They said we weren't missing any documents. Oh, but look, we were, and now we know why. Day after the meeting, document shows up, and it's an alteration of building permit letter. I didn't know what that was. I'm sure you guys do. They were disclosing that once they got their CU, they might be going to DPS for a permit to alter 2 structures on the property, plural structures, one or both of the structures. And of course, one of the structures is the historic barn, and it's described fully in this letter. So even though they told us multiple times they wouldn't be using it, and they didn't want us to see this document, now we have proof that they might want to alter it for use in their landscape operation. So these and other things that, we saw this company before us on Rustic Roads in 2017, I'll just be blunt here, absolutely trashed a 3-acre residential property on Old 100 Road, a Rustic Road. And when they got a notice from DPS, they would be required to put in stormwater retention ponds, they sold the property. So these are people that just don't have any respect for state law, county laws, regulations, and procedures. They were very difficult to deal with. They basically told us a lot of falsehoods, and we could only determine the truth of things after meetings were over. We're greatly delayed in providing information to you all. And so that's, I'll stop there. I just wanted you to understand how untrustworthy they are and what a tough process this was. Many meetings. So thank you for hearing me.
Thank you. Are you Mr. Hartsock?
Yes. And I sympathize with your need for glasses, and there have been much worse things done to my name than what you did to it. Can you hear me? Yeah. My name is Tom Hartsock, and I'm a neighboring resident and farmer with my permanently preserved farm lying to the west of and sharing a short border with the subject property. The stream that receives the runoff from the subject property runs through my farm and past my home. Prior to my retirement from the University of Maryland, I was director of a program that trained students for careers in the green industry, including a program in landscape management. So I am familiar with the workings of the landscaping industry. I concur with the planning staff's recommendation of denial. The absence of septic facilities and a TDR, along with Rustic Road impacts and violations, make this site unacceptable for a landscape operation. However, I am sympathetic to both the county's need for landscape contractors and the difficulty landscapers have in finding appropriate sites to locate their businesses. The county should identify appropriate locations for such businesses. That said, Mr. Alvarez is a repeat offender with regard to zoning regulations. Multiple complaints filed for violations at his previous Old 100 Road location included the dumping of large quantities of tree debris. Complaints to DPS were closed when Mr. Alvarez said he would apply for a CU approval, but the CU application was never filed. So clearly, Mr. Alvarez knew that his operations were not legal, and he should have filed for a CU approval the day after purchasing his next property. But it appears that he simply transferred his tree trash dumping operation to the current Price's Distillery Road location. Mr. Alvarez removed most of the visible tree trash and revised his initial CU application to indicate that snow removal operations will not be run out of the subject property facility. But if this application is approved, I fully expect the trucks will be outfitted with snow plows because snow removal is a cash cow for landscape businesses with available truck fleets and employees who are underutilized during periods of inclement weather. And I wouldn't be surprised if tree debris began to reappear, with Mr. Alvarez once again telling everyone that it will be used to mulch his non-existent fruit trees. Mr. Alvarez has clearly demonstrated twice that he will do whatever he pleases on properties he owns in the Ag Reserve, and he relies on the slow-moving government bureaucracy to give him time to operate his business with impunity. Does anyone care if repeat offenders are allowed to continue? The planning board and the zoning office should care. The rest of the landscape industry should as well. And the folks whose property abuts or is near the subject property care. Of the 9 affected property owners who have expressed an opinion on this CU application that I am aware of, 1 is not opposed and 8 are opposed, and 6 of those 8 wrote letters of oppositions that are appended in the staff report. Mr. Alvarez and his company have operated in violation of Montgomery County's Ag Reserve zoning for more than 5 years. Please don't let it continue.
Thank you. So I think we've heard from all the folks who had signed up to testify today. If there are any questions or comments for them, we could hear them now. Otherwise, we will. I would look for a motion to continue this hearing until next week, when we will notice it for the, or maybe it'll be at the earliest practicable date in the future, such that we can get a recommendation to the hearing examiner in time for the hearing examiner's, whatever date the hearing examiner may set for their consideration of this application. Could I get if there are no comments or questions right away, could I get a motion to continue?
So moved.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye. Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? That is approved. Thank you all for coming. Sorry to have to do this in a disjointed way. And we're adjourned.